Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Innovation Engagement Google Hangout with Jeremy Grant and from the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, or NSTIC, and Eve Mahler from ForgeRock. This Innovation Engagement series is meant to be a forum by which startups, entrepreneurs, and developers can learn more about different health IT-related federal programs and initiatives within the federal government. Before we get into the discussion, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. First, on the left-hand side, you'll see a Q&A app, so you should be able to use that to queue up any questions that may come to you during the discussion. And second, this discussion is going to be recorded and is available on our Google Plus page and on YouTube following the event. Third, I'd ask that you please check out some of the links that we've included on the Hangout page itself. These include resources to learn more about the recent White House executive order on multi-factor authentication in consumer transactions, websites for NIST and NSTIC, and ONC's Privacy and Security Working Group, a recent blog post by Eve and her organization ForgeRock, and more. So now I'll turn it over to Jeremy and Eve to introduce themselves. Jeremy, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and I'm glad we could all carve out an hour of time to talk in this Hangout about some important stuff going on with identity and privacy and security and health. I'm Jeremy Grant. My job is the Senior Executive Advisor for Identity Management at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And my day job there is running the implementation of a White House initiative that President Obama launched about 3.5 years ago called the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, or NSTIC. So, big mouthful of words and acronyms, but that's what I'm doing these days. Eve?
All right, well, I'll introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Eve Mahler, and I'm the VP of Innovation and Emerging Technology in the Office of the CTO at ForgeRock. I drive innovation into ForgeRock's open source identity stack, and I also lead the standards effort for something called User Managed Access, or UMA, which is a web protocol, as well as the forthcoming Health Relationship Trust, or HART, effort. And my history includes creation of a lot of interop standards, such as SAML for identity and XML for, I guess, any kind of data. And today I'm actually here to quiz Jeremy, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to ask questions of Jeremy, because we're really at a critical time in the web, in digital identity, in privacy. We're actually, at a crossroads. There's a lot of serious stuff going on in the world, and even with the recent Pew surveys, we've seen that people who are maybe not even technologically savvy are starting to cotton on to the fact that things are not so great in the land of digital data and digital personal data. And so maybe I can just start by asking you, Jeremy, what is NSTIC, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and what are its goals for catalyzing markets around improving things?
Sure. Great question, and thanks for starting off. I was going to say the answer to all questions you'll ask me is 17, but then you got more specific.
I thought it was 42.
Could be that as well. So NSTIC is the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. It's an initiative that was launched by President Obama in April of 2011 that's really focused on trying to improve trust online, as the title would suggest, by catalyzing what it calls an identity ecosystem, essentially a marketplace in simple terms, where all of us should be able to choose within a few years from a variety of secure, privacy-enhancing digital credentials that we can use every place we go online, in lieu of the 30 or 40 passwords that most of us are asked to manage today. It's really trying to get at three issues. The first is that passwords are, boy, they're a total fail when it comes to security these days, and they're also a total fail when it comes to usability. I think the current guidance that we get in our agency, where we still do have passwords for at least a few things, we're thankfully replacing a lot of it with our smart cards that we use. But 12 characters with uppercase, lowercase symbols, and numbers, and you have 30 different ones. Don't write any of them down, and don't make any of them the same. Shockingly, that doesn't work particularly well for people in government, and it gets even worse when you're dealing with folks like my mom in the suburbs of Detroit trying to manage access to a lot of different accounts. And it's not particularly secure that way either, because as I think a lot of folks who are tuning into this know, there's a lot of different ways to actually get through even so-called secure passwords. It's become an epidemic of sorts. If you look at the data breach investigation report that Verizon puts out every year in partnership with a bunch of law enforcement agencies around the globe, The report in 2013 showed a whopping 76% of all breaches and network intrusions were being executed by exploiting different weaknesses of passwords, which is a pretty stunning number. It basically means there's an anomaly these days when you're reading about a big breach in the news and somebody wasn't actually using the fact that there was a password protecting the system somewhere as a way to get in. The second thing that closely ties to passwords and authentication is the question of who are you on the internet? We're now 21 years and change since Pete Steiner had his famous cartoon in the New Yorker where the dog's typing on his computer and says to his friend the dog, the great thing about this internet thing is nobody knows you're a dog. And that hasn't actually changed too much today. I'm pretty sure that's Eve Mailer I'm dealing with and not a robot that looks like her. And you can be pretty sure you're dealing with me in this environment, but there's still lots of things where we're online where we don't know. And by the way, we might not need to know or want our identities to be known. There's an ability to be anonymous or under a pseudonym online that's great for a lot of environments. But conversely, there's a lot of things that we'd all like to do online where you're dealing with more high-trust, high-risk transactions. And there, a lot of them simply aren't available online, both in government and the private sector, if you aren't able to know that somebody really is who they claim to be, or at least know a few key attributes about them that gives you some confidence in the transaction. And the third thing that NSTIC's looking to do is how can we create this marketplace where you have more security, you can reveal parts of your identity, you have convenience. How do you do it in a way that actually enhances privacy rather than creates, well, it's not too hard to envision how you could architect it in a bad way that would not enhance privacy. And so, better security, more details when we want to be identified online about who we are with easy ways to actually use these solutions and enhancing privacy, all as a way to improve trust on the internet.
Wow, so that's a modest set of goals. How's it going?
Pretty good most days. I mean, we got a lot of work to do. But we've also actually accomplished a lot in the last 3 years. In fact, we're writing a set of retrospective blogs looking back on things as we head into the new year. It's the sort of thing, as you said, it is not exactly a set of modest goals. It's trying to solve some very difficult problems that others have tried and have been trying to solve for quite a long time. A lot of our approach has been, how do we work with smart people like you in the marketplace who are actually making awesome things happen already? Through new standards, through new practices, developing new products. This is a recognition from the White House when they put this together a few years ago that this is not the sort of thing the government's going to solve by issuing a government-issued ID like a lot of other countries have done, or even trying to specify to the private sector, a set of technologies that they could actually choose from. There's simply too much innovation going on, too many entrepreneurs that are out there today that are coming up with really great solutions for dealing with the identity conundrums online, that the best thing we can do is try to work in partnership with all of you, but try to put some influence in different places where we can. So we have funded to date a total of 15 pilot projects, including a handful that have a nexus with healthcare, and the pilots are really focused on not just developing new technologies, but actually taking great technologies and getting them out into the hands of real consumers and patients and others in the marketplace, letting them try new ways to log in online, and it's enabling some models that were not previously feasible. In the government, we've been working quite a bit. We'll talk a bit about today in conjunction with the President's recent executive order on the creation of a new government-wide shared service called Connectgov. That's very easy for citizens, if they're going to multiple agencies over the course of a year or just one, to use a credential that they already have in their pocket for identity and authentication instead of having to go through a new account registration process each time. We're excited about that, not just because it gets the government out in front on actually embracing NSTIC, but also we think it can tear down a huge barrier to online citizen services. We know most people don't really like registering for new accounts, and more than half tend to click off when they're asked to. If that's happening in government sites, we're failing to actually get through to people online, and so this is a way to try to address that. And we have a privately led steering group that was set up, the creatively named Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, that's got everybody from big companies like Eves to privacy advocates, academics, others, people from about 12 different countries working through a collaborative process to come up with a consensus set of standards and business rules that would basically enable a credential that I get from one company to be used interoperably either at a government site or interoperably at, frankly, any other site I might go to in the private sector online. So, some months are better than others. This is all focused on the voluntary multi-stakeholder collaborative process. But relative to where we started, as we come up on 3.5 years, we're pretty excited about the progress that's been made and the things that should be coming out over the next year.
So before we drill into Connectgov stuff, I want to reel back a little bit. There may be a lot of folks watching who are among the maybe non-technologically savvy, who don't often say the word pseudonymous, for example. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the tension between people who want to not be tracked on the internet and companies who, in the course of business, wanting to be more secure, or maybe wanting to target marketing to people for what people seem to maybe they think is nefarious reasons, want to know them better, let's say. So, there's a tension between remaining what feels like anonymous and becoming more known to all those companies, becoming more known to government agencies. There's a tension between anonymity and being well known, and that's, it's called high assurance, sort of as a technical term, which often equates to a higher security of the transaction. How do you reconcile that?
Well, it's a whole set of issues to reconcile, and I think a lot of it comes down to, the thing that's really pervasive throughout the president's strategy is choice. Because, a lot of the situations you just described, it all comes down to context. What information about me is being revealed at any different time in any sort of interaction online, and in what context. And the context that I'm appearing to you right now on my iPad, sitting in my dining room as Jeremy Grant at NSTIC.gov, that's one persona that I have. We were talking, when we were in the green room before this started, that even I both have musical side projects. My 6-year-old and my 3-year-old have decided we're going to form a band called Rock, Dinosaur, Roar. When I promote those activities online, I probably won't do it with my Jeremy Grant at NSTIC.gov account, although I think I just did. But this all gets down to it's a great band, by the way. We have one song, different things you do online, you do in different contexts, and the fact that people may have several different personas, whether it's online or in the real world, is something that I think it's something that's helped to fuel the growth of the internet and made it this awesome thing that we all use today, because we're not always out there under the same persona. And I think where there's been a tension is there's been some attempts, I think both from what other governments have done around the world, as well as from some companies in industry, to try and lock people into a single persona where the same set of information about them is revealed at all times. And people rebel against that tremendously, because that's not how we all work and how we interact online. So, giving people choices in terms of, what, different attributes about themselves they actually might want to reveal in any situation is really at the heart of the strategy. And so, a lot of our focus is, well, how do we catalyze that marketplace? The government can't solve this on its own. We can certainly be an example in our own applications that we're bringing online in terms of enabling that, because there's certainly things where we may offer where, to sign in, we actually don't even need to know your name. We just need to know if you have some sort of a login. So when we come back, the screen's purple again, the way you like it, instead of blue, like it is by default. Other times we might need to know a lot about you in order to give you access, say, to your health record. So it's tricky, but one of the things we're seeing is with the emergence of some new standards, it's not impossible, and it's actually becoming a lot easier than it's been in the past.
So, on the one hand, I'm actually very sympathetic to the point you're making. There's a saying we have in the user-managed access group that privacy is, as we know, not secrecy, but what it is, or what it should be, is context, control, choice, and respect. So I like that a lot. On the other hand, there is danger in a lot of people accidentally crossing the streams, right? When you use personae, and I guess I'm about to demonstrate it to you here. Let's just say I accidentally hit one of my other personae in the screen, and I switched to my band persona there in my lower third. You see that I've just revealed to the world that I'm in a band called Mud Junket. I really like Rock, Dinosaur, Roar, by the way. Love your song. One hit wonder. So, I think a lot of people are going to have to learn that it's easy to cross the streams, and it's easy for those correlations to happen when they don't really realize it now. So there's a kind of savviness that I think a lot of people will have to learn. So let's actually change subjects now and talk a little bit more about Connect.gov, and tell me, what the White House's new executive order might have to do with all of that.
Sure. So Connect.gov, just as background, one of the things when we launched NSTIC a couple years ago was an overwhelming, I would just say, tidal wave of feedback from industry that this is a great idea, and it's a bit of a far-fetched idea, which means, if you want all of our companies to start to buy into the idea of federating with each other, accepting each other's credentials, one of the most important things that you can do in the government is actually take steps to ensure that the government can be an early adopter of this idea itself. Because I think one thing we've seen in the past with federation efforts is people talk a good game, and then attorneys start to get involved and look at concerns about liability, and different folks in the security or privacy side come in and start poking holes in some of the premises behind the infrastructure that's supporting it. And people have tried to do things like this before, and they have never been quite as successful as people hope they would be, because we keep getting hung up on some of the same barriers. And they're usually not technology barriers. It's usually things more like liability, privacy, usability, interoperability. So we made a concerted effort in our side. I'm at NIST, but we were set up as an office established by the White House to try and coordinate implementation of NSTIC across government and the private sector. So one of the things that we've been doing with government, with our brother and sister agencies, and with some help from parts of the White House, is to establish a government-wide shared service that would allow agencies to easily plug into what is a growing marketplace of firms that have had their credentials accredited for government use in lieu of government agencies issuing their own credential. So, classic example, at a low level of assurance, what the government defines as level 1, I could be anonymous, I could be under a pseudonym, but you still may want to give me the option as I'm logging in to a site to not have to create my own a new username and password on top of the 27 I'm already managing. So there I could use a credential from a firm like Google or PayPal, who have gone through an accreditation process in the past with the government at that low level. At higher levels, where you actually might want to know that I really am Jeremy Grant, and the Jeremy Grant that lives in a certain street in Washington, D.C., and maybe a couple of other attributes about me, there you need something at a higher level of assurance that also would bring in a second level of authentication. So we've got firms like Verizon, Symantec, a little startup based in D.C. called ID.me that's focused a lot on the veterans and military community, that are all accredited at higher levels. Agencies have said, well, heck, it's nice that they're out there. How do we integrate with them? You mean I need to build a one-off connection to every one of those different identity providers that's out there and manage them and integrate with new ones as more get accredited in this ecosystem? That's kind of hard. And so when we started looking at what's the private sector do here, the answer was they recognize that it's hard, and they outsourced it to somebody who basically can provide all of that hard integration work as a cloud service. Connect.gov was originally called the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange, which was another long name that was not the snappiest acronym, and
okay,
it's been renamed and is actually ready to launch in the new year. But it is the first iteration of that system, where my agency NIST will be participating in it, along with the State Department, Department of Agriculture, and Department of Veterans Affairs. Those are the ones that have announced so far, and there are, I will say, several others that are close to announcing participation as well. But in simple terms, the idea is, if I am somebody who is, say, back from Iraq, 6 years, so I'm a veteran, and now I'm also a college student and having to deal with federal government, perhaps through the federal student aid side, the Department of Ed. I'm a taxpayer, so I might have to visit the IRS. I pay Social Security, so I might have to log in there. Do I really need to get a different credential to log into each of those sites, or can I use one that I already have, and that, with some of the firms I just named who are accredited, I'm probably using it in my private life already? How do I use that to log into these government sites rather than have to create yet another credential to manage? And so that's really what's at the core of this, is giving people, for the citizen side, it does a couple things. One, it allows you to get more online services with less hassle of creating new credentials. Two, what we're finding where agencies are really excited is it is going to enable, and it's already starting to enable, agencies to interact with citizens in ways that they never have before. In 2014, there's a lot of stuff that I think most people can look at government and say, I should be able to do this online, but I can't. And the reason a lot of agencies have not moved some online services faster is that the risk model of the application is such, or the transaction is such, that if they don't know pretty definitively that you really are who you claim to be and are not a dog on the internet, they're not going to release this information to you. And we've always sort of been hung up within government on this identity conundrum. Well, geez, how do we solve that problem? It turns out it's expensive. It's a hassle to get somebody a credential just for one application. You really start to generate a network effect if you actually have a shared service across government that all agencies can use, so that a citizen who goes through the process of getting the credential one time can use it multiple places. And there's a lot of things we've done to bake in security and bake in privacy. So, for example, the companies who I've named have to agree that they're not actually doing things like tracking what you're doing with it. And there's some privacy rules that they have to agree to that in some cases, depending on the firm, may differ from what they do with your information when you're transacting with them through a non-government application. So the whole idea is, how do we essentially build an easy button for government and, that citizens can all use to get access to new applications in a way that, frankly, gets agencies out of being in the identity business, where most of them aren't very good at it and don't want to be there anyways.
So, for folks who, don't live and breathe single sign-on and federation and maybe SAML and stuff, I think a lot of people may have experience, going to, let's say, a news website where they're invited to comment on an article, and you can log in through Google and Facebook and things like that. So that's often called social login or social sign-in. So what you're almost talking about is the social login pattern applied in a higher security, higher privacy setting. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think, in fact, at low levels of assurance, it's basically identical to social login. In fact, some of those same providers, like Google that I mentioned, will be used. I think the difference is the architecture here. Connect.gov is basically built with what we call a double-blind architecture, which makes sure that if I'm using my Google credential to come in, or whatever the credential provider is, they actually only know that I'm logging into something that's tied to Connect.gov. They don't know what agency application I'm going to. And likewise, the agencies don't have a way to aggregate what credentials are used to access different sites. So you have this broker in the middle that's able to provide a very strong, secure assertion, but it's able at the same time to basically blind the entities on both sides to what's going on, which is, we think, a pretty novel approach that should help to inspire both agencies and the public to trust the solution. At higher levels of assurance, I think the application is, yes, like Social Plus, like you said, you've got to go through some sort of an identity proofing process to get a credential. You got to prove to somebody that you really are Eve Mailer, if in fact you are, and have a something that has a second factor of authentication as well, because there's certain types of data that we frankly don't want to release if there's a possibility that somebody just stole your password and doesn't have anything else beyond that.
Kind of like Social Plus. That's a good way maybe of describing it for those folks who are familiar with it. So now tie in, if you can, this whole executive order from the White House and where that comes in. I know it's about multi-factor authentication, so strong authentication. What else is it about, and how does it relate?
Yeah, so on October 17th, President Obama signed an executive order. There was a provision in there that the executive order was tied first to federal payment systems, and a lot of it had to do with building more security through some newer technology into our payment card systems. But there was and that frankly got a lot of the attention that day from the press. But Section 3 of it was really focused on securing personal data within the government, and it's an executive order that basically states 18 months from now, so basically we're looking at by April of 2016, all federal agencies that are releasing personal data to citizens must only do so if they're using both multi-factor authentication and what is dubbed an effective identity proofing process. Now, Connect.gov is not called out in it. What is called out is for a couple of different parties in the White House to present the president with a plan within 90 days, which is in the middle of January, on how they will get there. So we certainly think that the work that's been done through NSTIC and Connect.gov is a very sensible solution. But I also want to be clear on this call not to talk about my pay grade. This is ultimately up to people in the White House to recommend what will happen to the president. So stay tuned. The bottom line is we were excited to see it from our office. We think it was putting some very strong executive action behind ensuring, separate from any shared service program, ensuring that the government really is leading when it comes to being an adopter of the identity ecosystem that is called for in the NSTIC.
Cool. All right, so basically no exact details regarding the connection between Connectgov and this executive order, but stay tuned.
So yeah, there are many people who are looking at what's happening with NSTIC and Connect.gov and reading the executive order and suggesting that there may be some connections between them. And all I would say on that is not an unreasonable conclusion, but the decision on what will actually happen is not mine. So stay tuned. What is important is to note there will be a solution, coming very soon that agencies can be making use of. One of the things I think that's important about the executive order, a lot of times when I'm asked, how are you doing with NSTIC, I go back to my days as an old poli-sci major where, I talk about things I learned about that you can actually do in government to get things done. So I've learned about legislation. Congress can pass a law that says that somebody has to do something. I learned about regulation, an agency that regulates. NIST is non-regulatory, by the way, but agencies that do regulate say this must happen. I learned about executive orders as ways to at least get government agencies to do something. I never learned about strategies back in Ann Arbor because they're not really powerful things necessarily in terms of having a stick on a policy side that you can use to make something happen. And so when I'm asked, how is NSTIC doing, given that it was a strategy, essentially a set of good ideas that said it would be really nice if everybody worked together to improve identity, I'm thrilled with how we're doing, in part because it forces us to rely on a lot of carrots. So having an executive order that, at least for the government agencies, backs up a lot of what we've been looking to do in NSTIC is something that we're quite excited about and glad to see.
Cool. All right, so let's switch gears to get a little bit more vertical. What are the implications of NSTIC for healthcare and for online health data sharing, even in maybe not a healthcare specific context, but even among quantified self movement and just fitness wearables and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, well, boy, when you threw in the wearables, we could really talk about that for the next 2 hours and do some interesting stuff there alone. I think on the themes we're talking about, sometimes it's great to be anonymous or under a pseudonym online, and sometimes you really want to know some things about somebody before you release the data. Health certainly falls into that latter category of sensitive personal data that if you're going to share it, if you're going to be transmitting it electronically, you want to make sure it's not to the proverbial dog on the internet. And so we've certainly, we're really glad that ONC organized this call. We've been working quite a bit with them over the last few years, in part because when you look at all of the different sectors of the economy where there is some data that you really don't want to go into the wrong hands, healthcare is certainly pretty high up on the top. Some might argue there could be something else, but health is a big one. So with that, of course, the question is then, okay, well, obviously we know we want to protect it and not send the information to dogs on the internet, unless maybe it's a veterinarian. But how do we actually do this in a way that is standards-based, that doesn't require us to have to spend $100 a user a year, that's interoperable with other solutions that are out there? And so there's I think a big difference between saying it's a really good idea to make sure you solve this whole identity problem and then actually getting some tools in place that developers can start to build into applications aligned with the NSTIC that helps them do that. And so we've really been trying to focus both with ONC and folks like you and other partners in the private sector, where are the gaps? How do we come up with these toolkits and some rules that stand behind them that actually enables us to, how should I say it, fully realize the promise of electronic health records?
I wonder, though, if that continuum of anonymity that people desire all the way to being very well known still doesn't apply to health data, at least in terms of data that I might want to share out with some other party versus data that might be shared out from, say, an agency. For example, I'm thinking of one of the very first identity projects that was done around federated identity in the government was PubMed, right? And the use case there was you might want to kind of save across login sessions at PubMed a basket of articles that you're interested in. And of course, the articles you're interested in at pubmed.gov might be revealing in some way of a disease you have, a wart you might have in an inconvenient place. And so you may want to be anonymous even across sessions. And so the idea was you should be able to log in with, it really was kind of a social level login with the pseudonymous features of the things like OpenID at the time, the protocol that was enabled for that.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a pseudonymous use case for health data, and I can think of others like, oh, I don't know, the whole Wi-Fi enabled scale thing. I mean, if I'm going to actually buy one of those, which I haven't yet, what I really like is the ability to use a RESTful API to post my own number into the scale so that it goes into the cloud and tells it what I weigh.
That's a startup idea. Let's do it.
Yeah, totally, right? Especially around this time of year. It seems like there's actually use cases up and down or all the way across the continuum for that anonymity use case. And once again, we need choice, I guess I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do. And like I said, a lot of it is context. I mean, look, you'll have a certain part of the population that's perfectly comfortable having the same persona with everything that they do online. Others want to be able to be very granular in terms of, both the ability to have multiple personas, or even as the same persona be disclosing different attributes about themselves at different times. And, bringing in things like Wi-Fi scales and other things that are suddenly these connected devices is only making the problem more complicated. It's not like we've simplified anything here, but it also makes it more urgent, I think, for us to come up with a toolkit of standardized solutions that basically align with the NSTIC and support the strategy that we can start getting out to some of the folks like those who are on this call to use and start building into these products.
So what kinds of technologies are you looking at in the kind of healthcare space that are friendly to the NSTIC vision then?
So we're not looking at anything specific to health, I'll say. I mean, we do have pilots that are using, where health is, one sector that's out there. Certainly, I mean, getting aside from just sort of the contextual, data release that we're talking about, there's been a simpler question on the authentication side. How do you get something into somebody's hands that's stronger than a password that they can all use? We've got these great PIV cards that we use in government, and I do say they're great. They've really, I log in every day with it with a digital certificate. It's really secure. I digitally sign stuff all day, which is great because I work for NIST, which is up in Gaithersburg, and I'm downtown at the Commerce Department, so I save a few trees every year by digitally signing stuff. The problem we're having today is this works nice for me with my laptop, but now here's my iPad, and
nowhere to put it.
Fit in. I should announce that today NIST did release Special Publication 800-157, which comes up with a way to basically derive a trusted credential from this into this. And we do think that, at least within government, a lot of agencies are going to be using that on the mobile side to extend the whole trust model of these cards out. But when you get into the consumer space, these have been around a while. My mom doesn't have one yet, and she's doing most of her stuff on her tablet. And I don't know that she's going to get something like that. But what she is used to are things like apps. And one of the things that we've been really excited about has been just an explosion of different ways that people can leverage different facets of mobile devices to handle strong authentication. The amount of work that's going on today, enabling people to use something that they're already holding in their hand rather than have to get a separate credential, is really fantastic. And so we're seeing everything from apps that you can download that rather than require you to frankly do a whole bunch of extra work, you can just have a push notification pop up on your smartphone and you push a green button and you're logged in. There's great crypto behind it, but it's really easy to use, and it's got a device based on a device you already carry. We're seeing other things emerge, like the new FIDO Alliance specifications that are out that will allow different online service providers to basically look at what kind of device you're using, and oh look, it's got a camera, or maybe it has a fingerprint sensor, or it's got a TPM chip for the trusted certificate store. How can we take advantage of things that are already out there in the marketplace today and get consumers to basically just flip a switch and start using them rather than have to carry something? So we're certainly encouraged just on, man, how do you get this thing into a person's hands? There's a lot of ways to do things today that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. On the separate issue of data attributes, this is probably a good time to turn around and ask you, as the leading humanitarian, UMA's user managed access, for those who don't know what it is, about some of the work that's going on there these days, including work that I think both of us are participating in, or at least somebody from my office, around the HEART initiative, because we think that's pretty exciting in terms of being a toolkit, like we've talked about, that can help get some of these solutions that we need.
Yeah, so you've turned the tables. All right, well, I'm happy to chat a bit about that, of course. Yeah, so I mean, I'm involved in user managed access, and I've been a little bit involved in OAuth, and for a long, long time I've talked about the new, well, not a long time, I can't say that now. A couple of years I've talked about the new Venn of access control. You know, having been described from time to time as the queen of Venn around Venn of identity stuff. There's this kind of new Venn that has OAuth and OpenID Connect and UMA in it that solve a kind of triad of key problems in this kind of RESTful API era. And that's where I was sort of going with the question about technologies, because like HL7 has this really important, I think, and intriguing work going on with the FHIR API, which is fast healthcare interop resources. I think I just got it wrong. In any case, it's this lovely RESTful API and a set of data structures that map to the HL7 work to capture interoperably healthcare data and clinical data. And so you can exchange it with sort of CRUD APIs, you know, the way that web devs do without even thinking these days. And so the question is, great, you have an API, well, you got to secure it. And how do you secure that kind of thing? The way you do it these days is with OAuth, so that you can sew apps together, with OpenID Connect, so that you can actually have portable identity, and UMA is the new thing on the scene, so that you can actually have, think of it as adding the share button like you'd have in Google Apps, so that you can direct sharing selectively. Was that a question?
So wait, just make sure I'm hearing correctly. So OAuth, despite the word auth being in it, you're saying does not actually address authentication, and you need OpenID Connect for that.
Well, you know, strangely enough, of course, authentication and authorization both have auth in them, so it's kind of awkward. In fact, the auth in OAuth technically stands for authorization, and here's how I would describe what it's really about. Technically, OAuth stands for open authorization. The job that OAuth does out of the box is really most akin to, this is really going to be maybe flummoxing some of the audience, but for those who know the WS star stack of specs, it's kind of like what WS security does, which is it puts a token in the header of an API or web service call so that that client of an API can succeed in making an authorized call. So it's a pretty limited security purpose. It is enabling the client to make an authorized call, but it's very limited. So it's really about app-to-app successful authorized calling. It doesn't go so far out of the box as to solve the problem of how does, this is how Uma would put it, how does Alice actually successfully share with Bob, or with Dr. Bob, or with husband Bob, or with Bob after Alice is deceased, and a lot of interesting healthcare use cases, right? So that's why I've been starting to think of a key problem that Uma actually solves, brings to the table, is adding the share button, which is something that you don't have really with some of these other pieces. So it builds on top of those other pieces. And so to put all that into context, once you have the Venn of access control, the new Venn, that's kind of a generic security and identity and privacy layer that you get. And then if you want to apply it to healthcare, interesting things come into play, like regulations in various jurisdictions, like special security needs, like special privacy needs, you know, if it's HIPAA or whatever it is, and that's regulatory. And then special healthcare semantics. Like one of the things I've learned talking to HL7 people, for example, is they have a notion of differentiating in consent directives between, can this person view data that I want them to see versus downloading it versus transmitting it. Now, if you're an OAuth person, you'd think, well, those sound like scopes. So you may very well want to profile something or put into a trust framework or put into an umbrella agreement, kind of like the kind of thing that a Connect.gov kind of broker would know about and build into, you know, its innards, that kind of understanding. So, in fact, the HEART working group that's just about to start at the OpenID Foundation, that Debbie Bucci of HHS ONC and I are planning to co-chair. Hopefully, we're convening the group. We're planning to work on that profiling process so that it's secure and sort of ready to be regulatorily compliant and semantically ready for health out of the box.
And so while we're excited about this, and you know, Debbie's sort of an honorary member of our office, by the way, but we'll have some NIST participation in the group as well, and if we had the Venn, picture 3 circles in front of your screen, you know, most people know where the OAuth side is of authorization. Here comes OpenID Connect, which is giving you the authentication token in a much better way than frankly, you're going to have without it. And then UMA sits on top to basically manage not just the share button, but how do I express my preferences for who I want to share what with and when.
Yes.
And wrap those all together. They're all basically, and the other two are extensions or profiles of OAuth that together is a nice toolkit that can do this in a much more standardized way than has ever been done before.
Yeah, in fact, you and I have talked about consent, and I've become rather maybe a bore getting on my soapbox all the time talking about consent and consent theory, but it's been this fascinating conversation of late with consent and the privacy conversations having turned into the I agree button. And consent at runtime, I just find it to be fairly weak. And we've acknowledged a lot of, IAPP professionals will say notice and consent are kind of failing us, and we keep wanting to do better and better at that. But in fact, when application A and application B have decided they want to exchange some information about you, and they ask you, do you want to consent to the flow of that? At that very juncture, you're at the weakest point in the negotiations, right? And so you're forced to either not get the service or say yes, right? People talk about the contract of adhesion. So one of the things I was fascinated to learn is that in healthcare they talk about consent directives, which we've all, we've signed those things when we onboard to a doctor's office on paper. And consent directives are fascinating things because what they are is authorization policy that sits there ahead of time. Of course, when they're on paper, I don't know how executable they are. That's quite awkward, which is why I'm involved in UMA and HART and things like that, to make them executable like enterprises do all the time with authorization and access management systems. But consent directives are, in fact, they can serve as prior authorization. So, in fact, what you're doing is asynchronous consent, either well before or well after Dr. Bob tries to get access to your stuff. And so it changes the notion, this attenuated notion of consent that we've somehow ended up with, which I've been so disappointed that consent turned into runtime consent, and I don't know when that happened exactly. So anyway, I'm stepping off the soapbox now.
Yeah. No, and we agree on our side. Consent's an important part of privacy, but sometimes people are boiling whether privacy is addressed or not to the simple question of, well, did people consent to it? Which, as you point out, if that's all we're asking, in a lot of applications at that point, it's already game over. The questions need to be asked when things are being architected earlier on. Why are certain things being asked for? What is this information really needed for? How do we design it in a way that minimizes privacy risk, right from the start, rather than build something and then, oh, we've got consent, well, it must be good then. So, on our side, we're certainly, working with the privacy engineering program at NIST with a lot of our partners, looking to drive that discussion a little bit deeper.
That's very cool. I'll remind folks, first of all, folks who are watching the Hangout on air, first of all, ask your questions. And second of all, what do you think about this question of what consent means? Have we gone overboard? In conversations with Scott David, who I know you know, he often talks about how, the notion of consent we've ended up with is sort of like that no trespassing sign, which was never meant to be, getting consent from a person who legitimately steps onto the grass. It's a CYA move. Are there ways that in the NSTIC conversation, actually, turning it back to NSTIC, are there ways that you're able to sort of fold this back into what you're doing? Is privacy engineering as a discipline affecting what you're doing with the pilots and other things?
Yeah, so I'd say it's been an integral part of it. NSTIC, I didn't talk about our guiding principles. So, there's 4 guiding principles for this identity ecosystem, this marketplace that the president calls for, which is that they have to be secure and resilient, interoperable, cost-effective and easy to use, and privacy-enhancing and voluntary. And the privacy-enhancing side's been a tough one, in part because a lot of people have different definitions of privacy and ask what that means. NSTIC actually gets into some pretty specific default behaviors of identity providers and other parties in the systems in terms of what they should and shouldn't be doing. They really go well beyond consent. But I think where we've actually been able to see some of the theory and the strategy hit the road has been in some of our pilots, where if you ask any of them, we're kind of hardcore in actually insisting that if they're taking federal grant dollars, they adhere to all 4 of those policies or those guiding principles and look to advance them. And so we have certainly been challenging a number of our grantees, really in the applicant phase. Show us how you're going to engineer privacy in from the start. By the way, this is a great place to make a plug keep an eye on our website, which is nstic.gov, nstic.gov. We expect late January, early February, we'll have another federal funding opportunity released for what will be round 4 of NSTIC pilots that we've been awarding every year. And, as always, we're very interested in partnering with private sector entities who, are, showing that they really buy into what the strategy is about and are interested in piloting solutions that can help to advance this marketplace.
Very, very cool. Good to know. So maybe now's a good time for us to start summarizing what's the call to action? What should people be doing? What material should they be looking at? What action should they take next?
So on our side, look, if this is, a community that's looking for toolkits, I know this is, we focus on developers, and we'll hopefully hear from some in a minute, look to get engaged with the HEART working group that you talked about up at MIT, or at least follow closely what's emerging from there in the next year. Pay attention to our pilots. Our Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, the website for that is idecosystem.org, is a all-volunteer entity where we've actually got some of the advocates on privacy, working hand in hand with a lot of companies and others in the space. Our next meeting is in Atlanta. Georgia Tech is hosting the last week in January, and it's free to participate, and you can even participate if you can't come to Atlanta because we've got a nifty online platform. Keep an eye on, what the White House suggests in the wake of the executive order. Agencies should be doing that. Should be big news after the new year. And, we're always happy to have you reach out to us. There's contact information, through our website or on Twitter. We're at NSTICMPO. If people have questions about, hey, I'm working on something, what do you guys think about it? How do you see the marketplace evolving? Please let us know. We always love to engage with different stakeholders. That's what I got.
Awesome. That's a great list. I will add to that. So just folks should also know that the HEART working groups, that's Health Relationship Trust, is getting started in the new year with Deb Bucci and me sort of beating the bushes right now for people to join the group. Our first meeting is going to be actually January 5th. You can find the information on openid.net because the work is being done at the OpenID Foundation. And if you're interested to follow the user-managed access work, we're actually working on wrapping up the v1.0 specs right now, and we're about to enter into interop testing. And you can find information on UMA at tinyurl.com/UMAWG. And that's also, there's a Twitter handle for that as well, UMAWG. And my own personal Twitter handle, and you can always ping me there, is XMLGRRL, XML Girl. And so encourage everybody to check out those resources. One last note from me, just being a ForgeRocker, I do have to mention that my company did announce an open source community project around UMA that's called OpenUMA. And if you go to forgerock.org/OpenUMA, you can find information there. There's some cool swim lanes explaining UMA flows, and everything my company does is open sourced. So in case that floats your boat, you can check it out. So any questions from the folks out there in TV land?
Yeah, we've got a couple more. This is Maya at ONC. We have a couple more minutes for questions if you guys want to type in on the Q&A or on the Google Hangout page. But if not, you can always follow up with us on the Google Hangout page itself if you'd like to post any questions. Even Jeremy has been kind enough to share their Twitter and contact information and NIST contact information, so feel free to follow up with them directly. And if not, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. So thank you so much for both of your time. I really appreciate it. The recording of this Hangout is going to be available on the Division of Science and Innovation's Google Plus page and on YouTube, and I'll also email it out. And I just want to thank everyone for participating. It looks like we had really good, a lot of people on the call, so I really appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays, and have a great rest of your week.
Happy New Year to everybody, and thanks all for letting me participate.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, everybody have a great day. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye all.